Hello, my name is Mr. Phillips and I'm going to talk you through how to answer question 1, aka the source question, for Edexcel Politics papers 1 and 2. The contents of this PowerPoint includes a slide on how to analyze a source, how to break it apart, a look at the mark scheme and how we can apply that to our essay, a structure, and then I will provide waggles what a good one looks like for an introduction, for one of the 3 core paragraphs, and a conclusion, followed by a summary of all the main takeaways. So, for the purpose of this demonstration, I am going to use an example of a source from a past paper. The question is, using the source, assess if the voting age should be changed. Quite a nice question for you to analyse. First thing I'm going to do is brainstorm what I already know. So before I even read the source, I'm going to think of what are the main factors, preferably 3, that I would be looking for within this source to help me answer this question. Remember, question 1 sources are effectively question 2 essays, but the only difference is you have to get your stimuli from the source, and you can't bring outside stimuli in terms of what your big argumentative factors are. So for me, I look at maturity when assessing whether the voting age should be decreased from 18 to 16. I look at education. Are 16-year-olds educated enough? And I also look at responsibility. Are 16-year-olds given responsibility in society that would deem them eligible to be able to vote? Once I've done that, I'm then going to start looking at the source. I'm going to be looking for 3 factors within this source. And for each factor, I want to look for an argument that agrees and one that disagrees with the overall question. So, first of all, in red, I have identified that the source talks about maturity, agreeing that 16-year-olds are mature enough to vote. In blue, I have then identified that the source suggests that 16-year-olds have enough responsibility to be able to vote. And finally, at the end of this source, it briefly mentions that 16-year-olds do have the educational capability to be able to vote. Going on to the counter-argument of the source, and the sources will always have an argument for and against. Might not be entirely balanced, but it will. I've identified that the source then goes on to argue that 16-year-olds are not mature enough. It then goes on to argue that 16-year-olds have not acquired the education necessary to understand the voting system. And finally, there is an explanation that 16-year-olds, although they do have some responsibilities, don't have enough to warrant them being able to vote. The key thing here is identifying the 3 factors and then matching up or pairing up the arguments for and against within each factor. They will provide the 3 core paragraphs of our essay. Once that is done, it is time to start writing. So before we write anything, I'd just like to make you aware of the mark scheme. This is so important. Having been an examiner for many years myself, I understand how big a part the mark scheme plays in a teacher deciding on what level and subsequently what mark to give a student. There are 3 assessment objectives, or AOs. AO1, firstly, is your ability to demonstrate knowledge and understanding of the political picture in relation to the set question. You need to apply that throughout your essay, from introduction to conclusion, with detailed, accurate, relevant, and up-to-date evidence. This is why it's so important to stay informed on the daily news, because this is evidence. AO2, Assessment Objective 2, is your ability to make a comparative analysis. So each paragraph should have arguments for and against in relation to your question. And finally, AO3, Assessment Objective 3, is your ability to pass judgment and give an opinion. This can be included at the end of your introduction. It should be included throughout and at the end of your 3 paragraphs, and also in your conclusion. So before we write anything, it is important that you understand the structure that is expected for a top level and graded answer. You should have an introduction. Quite brief, but you do need to have one. And in this introduction, you should clarify what the key command words are of the question. You should give a bit of context and set the scene. You should highlight the main arguments for and against and give an early judgment. This will allow you to return to this judgment throughout the essay, which will demonstrate very good evaluative judgment. The core of the essay should have 3 large paragraphs. One for each of the key factors. So one for maturity, one for education, one for responsibility. Within each paragraph, you should divide it into arguments for and arguments against. Try and follow the standard point evidence explain formula. This will ensure that your essay has clarity and it ticks all the boxes of AO 1, 2 and 3. You should use a quote to demonstrate your arguments for and against within each factor. This shows that you are explicitly referencing the source. Remember, you should not be getting your factors or your arguments from anywhere else apart from the source. If you think the maturity is a very important argument for voting at 16, but it is not mentioned as one of the key factors in the source, then you cannot mention it. You will not be credited for it. Once you've done your 3 paragraphs, you come to a conclusion. This should be balanced. You should acknowledge both sides of the argument, but you should then give a decisive overall judgment. Do not sit on the fence. And make sure you substantiate it with a summary and an explanation of what you have covered throughout the essay. So I will now talk you through a waggle, what a good one looks like. And you can apply the same principles to any essay that you decide to write. I won't read everything. You can read this for yourselves, but I will just explain the process. So here's my introduction. First of all, I want to tick off the AO1 element from the mark scheme. So I'm going to give it a little bit of context. All right. We are being asked, should the voting age change from 18 to 16? Therefore, I'm going to set the scene with a little bit of evidence explaining the background to this topic and how the age of voting previously came down from 21 to 18. Secondly then, I want to tick off some AO2 and highlight the different arguments that I will be addressing during my essay. And finally, I want to tick off the AO3 box and give an early judgment. I can then use this and refer back to this judgment at the end of each paragraph that I write, as well as in my conclusion. So onto the main body of the essay. There are 3 paragraphs expected of you. Each paragraph should focus on looking at the arguments for and against each factor. So paragraph 1 in this instance could look at maturity, paragraph 2 responsibility, paragraph 3 education. I won't read this again for you, but I'll just talk you through the structure and the process. So first of all, always make sure that you use the wording of the question in your opening statement, as well as in your closing explanation. You should always use a quote from the source that backs up your argument in each paragraph. This shows that you are explicitly referencing the source. It is important to remember that you can only use arguments that are present in the source, as mentioned previously. You will then counter your agree with a disagree on maturity. Again, opening point, using the wording of the question, some detailed, accurate and relevant evidence in the middle of that paragraph, and then end it with an explanation to tick off the AO1 and AO2 boxes. Finally, you end your paragraph, your big paragraph on maturity, on your first factor, with a mini conclusion, where you give a judgment and you substantiate it with some evidence. You repeat this 3 times for each of the factors mentioned previously. Finally, we will end our essay with a conclusion. This is an opportunity to rack up your marks for the AO3 element of the mark scheme. Start your conclusion with your judgment. Overall, I believe that the voting age should stay the same. Okay, I've given a decisive judgment. I will then show a little bit of balance by acknowledging the alternative argument, why some people may believe that lowering the voting age is a good thing. However, I will return to my judgment and I will substantiate it with an explanation, and I will ensure that I am decisive and I do not sit on the fence. And that is your waggle completed. So, to conclude, here are the main takeaways on answering a question 1 source question for politics papers 1 and 2. Read the question and ensure you fully understand it. Make sure you understand what the key prompt words are, what the key stimulus words are. Make sure that you are answering the correct question. Before you read the source, brainstorm the main factors that you believe should be debated. You can then look for these in the source. If they are not in the source, you should not talk about them. Only use information from the source. Read the source, have 3 highlighters, and try and find 3 factors that you can work on. And try and find within those factors areas which agree and disagree with said factor. Trying to pair them up. Make sure you follow my structure, your introduction, your 3 paragraphs, and your conclusion. Make sure you use a quote in each paragraph and for each argument to show that you're explicitly referencing the source. Make sure you use relevance and up-to-date support and evidence. This is why you should be checking out the news daily and seeing what is going on in British politics. End each paragraph with a mini conclusion. This is key to getting those AO3 marks. And be decisive in your conclusion. Don't sit on the fence. Hopefully that is of some help. You can apply this structure to any question 1 source from papers 1 and papers 2. Good luck.